Welcome everybody to this webinar, which is going to focus on growing great managers across the globe. I'm delighted to introduce Nick Pope, who is the Global Learning Director for Unilever. As well as being responsible for global learning, Nick has specific expertise in top team development. And one of the things that I most enjoy about working with Nick is that his practice is very much informed by the science and a strong evidence base, but is also what's pragmatic and what will actually really work for the population. Nick is working towards a doctorate from Ashridge Business School, which explores the factors that distinguish high-performing executive teams, and his first degree was in genetics. As a practitioner, he's got over 20 years' experience with senior global leadership development and talent roles for AstraZeneca, Bausch & Lomb, and GlaxoSmithKline, before moving to Unilever, and has also worked with a consultant for other blue-chip companies like Coca-Cola and Nike and Channel 4. And today, Nick is going to share the experience of, specifically with Unilever, growing great managers across the globe. And then towards the end of this webinar, I'm going to ask some specific questions so we can get under the skin of actually what happened too. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Nick. Thank you so much for joining us today, and we look forward to hearing the story.
Thank you, Seb. Hello, everyone. A pleasure to be here. So today I'm going to share with you some of our learnings from the Unilever Management Development Program, which over the last 3.5 years now we have been building. And I'm going to cover a few things. I'm going to talk about how does the UNDP, the Unilever Management Development Program, fit into Unilever's overall strategy. What is it? How is it a bit different from what we had previously? How did we go about measuring it, and what were some of the lessons learned? A few words about Unilever, in case you've not had the opportunity to come across the company before. Unilever's consumers, around 2 billion of them, use one of our products every day, so you can see some of the great brands that we have there. And its heart, Unilever is a company which is about marketing and great people. And in terms of people, we have about 170,000 or so of them, of which around 16,000 are managers. So the program that I'm going to talk about today looks to speak to those 16,000 managers and help them develop their managerial skills and capabilities. One of the things which Unilever is best known for is its purpose and purpose-led growth. The purpose of Unilever is about making sustainability, sustainable living commonplace. And particularly our brands like Dove, Lifebuoy, you may have seen quite a lot in the press around that. And what our strategy for Unilever is to double the size of our business whilst reducing the overall environmental footprint and having a really positive impact on society. So the obvious question is, well, why the Unilever Management Development Program? Did you not have something there before? And of course we had many programs there before, but the questions that we were holding in our learning and talent function were all around, do we have the right capability and talent to build and run a business double the size that we are now? So at the time, Unilever's CEO, Paul Polman, set his ambition, the business was around 40 billion. So we were asking ourselves, do we have the right capability, the right people who can run a business which is double the size? So a business which is 80 billion. And when we look at how we are currently developing our people, we have what I think is a really nice, simple model, which we call PACE. Again, another acronym here. The P stands for perform, the A for achieve, C for change, and E for establish. So when you join Unilever, the programs and to develop your skills that are open to you are all sit in the perform, and our goal is to help you get to a level of really good, strong performance as quickly as we can. Those people that demonstrate consistent performance over time become what we call watch listed. So this is kind of a pre-potential stage. And at that stage, you open up the programs that sit behind the Achieve block, the Achieve level, which are a very successful program we have called Accelerator, which takes people through a series of development activities over 9 months. After you've proved your potential, then you then have the change programs available to you. These are what we call the HP, the high potential programs. And then finally, here you can see it's a circle. As you move on to your next role, we help you establish and to have the best induction possible to give you the best start. So the important thing to know here is this is broadly the architecture for how Unilever sees people developing. And the UNDP sits squarely in that perform, that red square bucket. The other thing to know about Unilever is how we're structured in terms of our people and development. So we have this WL down the side of the screen that stands for work level, loosely corresponding to the transitions pipeline model, which is the individual contributor, manager of managers, and so on. And when we looked at what we had there previously, put this slide up, we had in the work level 1, so that's the individual contributor, work level 2, the managers, and the work level 3, managers of managers, typically director level. We had around 25 programs that were developed at different times. When you laid them out in the front of on the table, there were many areas of overlap. Some were off the shelf, some were custom to Unilever. They weren't really keeping pace with the rate of change in the organization. And more importantly, in none of those programs did we very clearly articulate consistently, what does a Unilever manager do? What does it mean to be a manager at Unilever? What does Unilever expect from you? And what do you expect from Unilever? So there was a job to be done to first of all articulate what the great managers do at Unilever, but also to take all of these programs and ask ourselves the question, is it worth it? Is it worth shutting down all of these local programs, which, by the way, if you picked up the happy sheet, they would all say that they were performing fine. Is it worth us actually doing something here, or should we just leave it alone? We made the decision to consistently apply a management development framework across Unilever with 3 different programs, which I'm going to talk about today: the UNDP Discover, Explore, and Pioneer. But in doing so, we faced a massive challenge. First of all, it wasn't broken. So probably the people listening on this call have a number of different things you could focus on. And the things that aren't broken probably don't come to the top of the list. So why would we go about fixing something which, to the business, they didn't see as particularly broken? And we faced tremendous challenges of scale. 16,000 managers distributed over 100 countries, working in different languages with a range of variety, skills and experience, and also with a different maturity of those markets as well, requiring different things, added on an additional layer of complexity. So what that meant is that our program had to do certain things. So the first thing that we realized very quickly is we could go to the Dictionary of Managerial Skills, which for a long time has been Lominger, and the hundreds and hundreds of skills in there, we could try and train all of them. Or we could choose those skills that have been shown to make a real difference. And we chose to do that instead. We wanted something that was globally consistent but allowed customization at point of delivery as well. We needed something which had some good, strong science behind it, as opposed to just what somebody thinks might work. Sustainability is very important to Unilever, so to the extent to which we could, we wanted to manage the paradoxes of distributing the learning, so spreading it out, but also maximizing the amount of time that people have to minimizing the amount of time that people have to travel, so we don't incur any additional air flights for tutors and things like that. And we knew that, like many companies, our managers at Unilever are smart and they expect a good experience on the program and have been through many management development programs before, so the bar was slightly higher. I'll talk about how I went about convincing our senior leadership at the end in the Q&A, but for now, let's just zoom in on some of those design requirements. When we looked across externally, we decided to set up 2 advisory boards, both an internal design group, which took representatives from every function, cluster and geography who could input into what the curricula looked like. And we also set up an external advisory board. And you can see some of the organizations we invited to join us here. You can also see how we've disproportionately weighted it to D&E markets to the east. So the Human Capital Leadership Institute, the HCLI, a very good research-based outfit in Singapore, and CEIBS as well, the China Europe International Business School. For us to get to that 80 billion, we know that our ability to rapidly attract and develop talent in D&E markets is going to be really important to us. And particularly for me, having delivered many management development programs, so much of the theory and thinking comes out of the West. And management is has a different nuance to it in different countries, and I think to try and do a one-size-fits-all just doesn't work. So our internal and external advisory board were really important for this, and something that I would encourage anybody going about doing something similar to make sure you have both that internal and the external angle as well. The model we went for was with one of our key partners, MindGym, 7 Talents model, based on from of their white papers, Return of the Manager. Again, the interesting thing about this model is that Relate is right in the center of the model. And the other interesting thing about this model is the fact that we call out Thrive, which is someone's ability to look after themselves, to look after their teams, and to take a moment to build those skills of renewal, which in an ever-increasing busy life is the one thing that often gets taken away. It's also sometimes quite difficult to talk about that stuff at work. Whereas for us, we know that unless our managers are able to renew their own capacity for energy, then there's no way and they're going to be able to give and shine that out to people in their team. So that was the 7 Talent model, which MindGym helped us introduce. We decided to brand 3 different programs for our 3 different audiences: the new manager, the experienced manager, and then the manager of managers. And rather than it be work level specific, so you have to be a work level 2 or you have to be a work level 3, I gave the ability for participants and their HR business partners to choose what the right program was for them, because we have a lot of people at our work level 2 who are managers and have very big portfolios to look after business and people. So I think trying to have some flexibility again around enrollment and not just going with the hierarchy certainly helped build some momentum here. The program itself leverage these principles of distributed learning. So for me, it's often what happens before what you do that makes a difference with programs. So the ability to get really good feedback, and I call it this kind of moment of deep insight when somebody has to take a sharp intake of breath. Unless you can get that very early on in a program, my experience is they generally fail. So I knew that having a good sharp diagnostic up front that wasn't one of these things that would just kill you with pages and pages of data would be very important. So the coaching process started before the program actually began, where people came together. We chose some modules to put face-to-face, and we also chose some other modules that would work virtually as well. Again, trying to honor what we believe about sustainability. Particularly for the module around coach, we thought some of the best ways to teach that was by doing. So you can see there that the peer learning and peer coaching approach to drive some of this learning was really important for us. I've spoken briefly about the diagnostic. One of the benefits of having the external advisory board was a lovely input from Professor Julian Birkinshaw at London Business School, who had this idea of the manager net promoter score. So this is how likely would you be to recommend your manager as somebody to work for. Very, very sharp rating, which in many ways brings the whole 360 data into focus instantly. And whilst that was only one part of the data, what it did do is engage people with the rest of the data as to see why they would have scored high or would have scored low on this. And interestingly, as we've done some correlations on this, as you would expect, those managers who score high on the Net Promoter Score also score very high on their team's engagement survey. So you would expect that, of course, but it's interesting to see the relationship proven out. The other thing that was very important about the UNDP, and also important to Unilever, is trying to actively try and market the program rather than just assume people are going to rock up and come to programs. How could we leverage all the great work that we do in marketing in a slightly tongue-in-cheek way and create a good communications campaign around this? So MindGym were brilliant here to take our Unilever assets and try and UNDPize them so people realize that there's something slightly different about this program. We also did quite a lot of external PR for the program as well. Again, one of the big learnings here that I'll talk about later is how do you build and control a narrative around the program rather than just assume if you've got good content, that's going to be enough. So we worked hard to actively place articles in People Management and Chief Learning Officer magazine as well. As we look at measurement, in my last 20 years, this has been a subject that's always been around with various Kirkpatrick models and all this good stuff that I'm sure people on the call are familiar with. I like to think about measurement in a slightly more flexible way. I'm hoping one of the themes that you've picked up from the webinar so far is the importance of flexibility when you're globally trying to configure a program here. And for me, there are some very important hygiene factors that at Unilever we measure rigorously. So, of course, level ones, but that's really a hygiene factor. Other things around seat utilization and all the stuff to do with the mechanics of a program are, for me, are hygiene factors. The more important ones are around return on what I call expectations, ROE versus ROI. And the expectations of the Unilever management program were quite high because, again, going back to the start, what we were trying to do was ask ourselves the question, do we have enough people ready to run a business of double its size? So our measurement factors for this were some of the talent readiness metrics. We also looked at some of the employee engagement scores of the people that attended the program, not the participants themselves, but their teams. And we looked at the performance scores of the teams of the people that attended the program. So I think there's sometimes a mistake here of trying to pull and attribute things which any half-decent L&D person could pull apart very, very easily. The tight link between performance and management development, there are so many factors that could influence that. I think if you were to do an ROI on your ROI calculation, it probably wouldn't work unless you're looking at something unidimensional like negotiation skills or sales management. I think if you begin to look on a larger scale at the performance of the team, of the people that go on the programs, and the employee engagement scores of the team that go on the program, then you start to see some much better relationships and much better correlations. So for us, those, particularly the relationships to performance and trying to look at, well, do people who go on the team, go on the program, did their team actually improve? We were able to show with some of the pilot groups that we did up to a 23% increase in the performance improvement of teams that went on the Unilever Management Development Program. I will just pass through these slides quickly because these are slides that you would expect. Of course, I'm going to say that everything was great and people loved it and they were able to deploy stuff. I wouldn't be talking about it today if we didn't see that. But again, I think it's more important to think about, well, what were those expectations early on? Have you really built people that are able now to run a business double of its size? So I will conclude with this before the Q&A. The flexibility and the one-size-fitting-no-one is so important for any global program where you're looking to cover so many people. And my learning was to focus much more on the quality of the coach and the ability of the coach to develop fluency with Unilever rather than to try and enforce a particular model on the participants. I spoke about Thrive and the importance of helping managers renew their energy in order for them to perform at the level they need. We talk a lot about resilience in organizations these days. It's very topical, and I think building that right into the management development program rather than to be something separate is very important. You saw me talk about the importance of branding and communications, and perhaps in the Q&A I'll talk more about what I mean by keeping the faith. But for now, thank you for listening, and Seb, I'll hand back to you.
Great, thank you, Nick. That's fantastic. Really thorough, really interesting insights there. We do have some questions that people frequently ask, and some questions coming in. The first one is, I think, particularly relevant for individuals who they've got a global organisation, and there are lots of different activities happening. And there is a desire for consistency so that there's a similar language and approach to leadership to support talent mobility. How did you go about building the momentum to make these changes within Unilever?
I spoke about this early on around we had 20-something programs which weren't broken. So
right, yeah.
I invest time in this. And I think the smart move here is to try and connect all of the different patterns of internal data that exist into one story. So some of the pieces of data that existed for us were around the employee engagement scores. When people looked at managerial capability, it was okay, as in it was in the around the 72%, but versus Unilever's ambition, it wasn't good enough. There certainly wasn't consistency over what great managers did at Unilever. And when we looked at some of the capabilities for where we were looking to really drive growth, for us, Africa is very important, D&E markets are very important. When we looked at some of our analysis there, managerial capability was coming to the top. And fundamentally, all of these things often come down to a conversation between a manager and somebody in their team. And if you can imagine pulling all those pieces together on a piece of string and use that as the momentum for change to talk about how the UNDP will help us run a business double the size, as opposed to the fact that we just need to have consistent language. I think the consistent language is really important for people that work in HR, that work in L&D, but actually if you're in a market somewhere, if you're a manager, you really don't care. You just want to be better at servicing your team, doing your job, balancing all of the different demands that you have. So I think whenever you lead with something like, it's really important for us to have consistent language, you're always going to fail, because it's just not important to people that do the job. It's more important that you help them just face some of those everyday challenges they have with their people that they need a hand with.
In terms of the internal stakeholders, so of those 25 programs, there must have been some that people felt were kind of their babies or that were working. How did you persuade them to make a shift to your offering?
Yeah, there were many people who had, some of these programs were quite old, and as you say, they've got some stakeholders. Things like this come down to belief, leadership, and influencing stakeholders. So for me, the case around wanting to have really help managers with the modern day dilemmas that they face, and wanting to build talent for business double the size, and knowing that I was able to deliver a really good program, those three things gave me the belief just to, when necessary, go into battle with some of these people. Some of the programs I was in charge of, so it's easy for me to close them down. But then you have a lot of people with their arms crossed on the sidelines, giving you the, go on, Sonny, I'm just going to watch for you to fail here. Hence why the external advisory board and the external branding that we did is very important to start to build a powerful narrative around what it is that we're trying to do.
Got it. That's great. And then, I mean, again, this must have been one of the most significant management development programs in the world over the last few years. What do you know now that you wish you knew before you started off this particular journey?
I think the importance of getting early wins is super important, and that's very tough, because in the early stages, what you're trying to do is test materials and test coaches. So on the one hand, you need to create an environment which is safe to fail, because you're testing. And if you're not getting some pushback, then you're probably not pushing people far enough. But you also need to lock and secure those early wins. And I think the way that, and I did both. I had some really bad early programs and had some really good early programs. And it came down to the quality of the faculty and the extent to which I was able to accelerate their fluency with Unilever. So for me, the program transformed when I, in partnership with one of your colleagues, Seb, I helped sponsor a big coach upskill day where we got lots of coaches in, gave them more in-depth understanding of the program, but also gave me the opportunity to talk about Unilever, help them meet people from Unilever. And sometimes there's an expectation on the client side that, well, vendors should just do that. But actually, it really has to be a partnership. So I think what I wish I would have known, I would have done that earlier on. And I would have invested a lot more time and energy in building the faculty as extended members of my team. Controlling the narrative is something that one of my previous bosses taught me, and has always stayed with me. It's very important for a program like this. And how do you build an internal and external narrative is very important. And again, something which, when you're focused in the heat of the program, and by the way, of course, the program is maybe 5% of your job, you're doing many other things. It's one of the things that's easy to slip, but very, very important. Lastly, the amount of time it takes to stabilize a program. UNDP has been going for around 3 years now. One of the measures of its success is people vote with their feet at Unilever. If they don't like the program, then we're really not going to sell any. I deliberately made it not mandatory for people to go through. And actually, with a target of around a quarter of all of our general skill spend, we're spending up 29% now of all of our spend on UNDP. So people are wanting to go on the program, but it's only been in the last, I don't know, 14. So it was kind of a year and a half point where we really started to see uplift. So my last learning is it really takes time to stabilize a program. It's not a question of just getting in there, throwing it over the fence, and off you go. You have to keep the faith, you have to be committed, and you have to control the narrative.
Great. And then as a result of the program, what would you say have been the biggest successes? What are you kind of proudest of in terms of the results that have been driven?
Three things, I think. The first of all is the percentage of, in the pilot groups that we did, the percentage of ready now talent to take on bigger roles, again, which is one of the key expectations of this program. It's considerably more for those people that have had the UNDP versus those that haven't. When we look at I mentioned this previously, when we look at the performance ratings of the teams of participants that have gone on the program, in the pilot groups that we did, they showed an increase of nearly up to a quarter. So the manager is doing something different now with their teams to drive performance compared with somebody not going on the program. And I think the last one is around the employer brand. We like to think of Unilever as a place where you come to learn how to lead and you learn how to manage. It's certainly for marketeers one of the places where you really earn your stripes and learn your craft. And I think when we look at some of the reasons why people want to join Unilever today, it's because of this world-class development that they have an expectation that they'll get. And I'm proud of being able to contribute to what was already a very strong employer brand, but with something a bit more sustainable, with something around the individual's development. I think the last thing that just popped into my mind is talking about resilience, talking about mental health, and the fact that life is getting only more complicated. It's quite a tough conversation to have at work sometimes. I think we feel we need to be heroes and just crack on with it. So opening up a space for people to talk about how do I thrive, how do I renew my energy, and allowing that to be a legitimate conversation in an organization like Unilever, I'm quite proud of, because I think so many people take that stuff home and it bleeds into family life and other things, but actually talking about that with your colleagues has been really powerful.
Great. And then just on I suppose on the thought about reflecting back, what question that we quite frequently get is from people who are just thinking about launching a similar type of approach. Is there any specific advice that you would give those individuals who are just on the sort of cusp of starting out on designing, developing, launching a similar kind of intervention to UNDP?
My advice would be it's very seductive to think about the one-size-fits-all, to get the model where it's going to work everywhere. But think about, how can I build freedom in a framework? How can I build a really solid, consistent approach which has as much flexibility as possible? And that's the paradox, because those two things are on totally different ends of the spectrum. But actually, the real magic lies in the space between those. So I would say resist the temptation to go for the glossy-looking model and to deploy that everywhere, and approach it more with a sense of how can I be consistent and flexible at the same time.
That's great. And then I've got one final question, Nick, which is less related to the managerial population, because I know that you are particularly passionate and focused on the very top of the house, the sort of the executive team. just in terms of developing that population, do you have a point of view about? And I know that on this webinar we've got a number of people who are charged with executive development right from the top of the house. Do you have a point of view about how that is best conducted?
I do. I mean, first of all, it needs to be conducted. You have an assumption in your question that stuff goes on, and often people will struggle to get that CEO group and CEO -1 actually to go through programs. And we make an assumption that either they don't need it or they're too busy. So first of all, do something, which is better than nothing. In nearly all of those groups, and probably most of the companies listening today, you have individually brilliant people who come together and are collectively average. And the question that they need to answer is, what is it that we can do together that we can't do apart, without trying to force fit our agendas? What part of our agenda is custom to this team, that if only we can come together and focus on those things, we're able to step change our performance. So my advice in answer to your question is, number one, do something. Don't assume that it's not going to happen. You're going to have to push very hard to get time and energy and effort for it. And often the best way to do it is this idea of the double task. So focus on the business and the team at the same time, rather than take people off for an offsite, stick them on beanbags and have them do some kind of psychometric profiling. That kind of stuff is, probably important in the early stages, but the research is very clear. It doesn't shift performance. Only when you look systemically at the team, at their purpose, how are they renewing each other? Do they have a very clear commission around what it is that they've been asked to do? Are they clear on the areas that they need to be together and the areas that need to be apart? Do they know what their standards, the rules of engagement are? Do they have the right level of trust? And lastly, what are they doing to distribute their leadership to the extended teams below them? These are some of the questions that coaches to the top team really need to be helping the leaders with. But thanks for the question.
Great, that's fascinating. I really like the point about individually brilliant but collectively average as a very top team. So with that, we've run up to time. Nick, thank you so much for telling the story of the partnership between Unilever and MindGym. And thank you for your continued sponsorship. That was just wonderful, and I'm sure everybody on the webinar very much appreciated it. So thank you very much. And
thanks,
for all of you who are listening, goodbye.